Okay, Microeconomics, Chapter-2, Part-2. So in the first part of the Chapter-1, we have discussed the various problems or central economic problems faced by an economy. So in this lecture, we will discuss how those problems are to be solved. How does this economic problem are solved? We have to discuss in this lecture. So here we are going to discuss about the topic price mechanism and working of a market economy. So here we are going to discuss the price mechanism or the the method of price mechanism to solve all the central economic problems. So how does an economy solve this economic problem? So there are basically two methods. So one method which we are going to discuss is market mechanism or price mechanism. So price mechanism, that is what goods are to be produced and in what quantities, which methods of production we have to adopt, and then distribution of the output. All these problems are to be decided by the or determined by the price mechanism or the market forces. Here market forces or price mechanism, we mean it is the free working of the forces of demand and supply. So what goods and at what quantities, how to produce, how to distribute the goods and services are all determined by the free working of the forces of demand and supply. Again, I repeat, it is the free working of the forces of demand and supply. So in such an economic system, capital and other means of production, they are private property of an individual, and it is the private companies or the private individual who undertake the work of production. And in such cases, even the consumers, they have the freedom to buy the goods they wanted. And in such system again, those goods will be produced more for which there is more demand, and those goods will be produced less for which there is a less demand. So for example, let's take an example of a computer. So if there is a high demand for computer, then prices generally will go up. So it will become profitable to produce and sell more computers. So as a result, producers will produce more of computer and more resources will be used for their production. So on the other hand, let's take an example of a scooter. When the demand for scooter declines because people start preferring the low priced cars, such as Maruti 800, etc., the producer in return will respond to these changes in preference by withdrawing resources from the production of scooters. Since the demand for scooters decline, then resources allocated to that production of scooters will also decline, and using them for the production of small cars. Since demand for scooter has declined, they will withdraw the resources allocated for producing scooters, and more resources will be allocated in producing low priced cars because they have preferred that instead of a scooter. So what we can see is that changes in the demand for goods by the consumers will lead to the changes in their supply by the producers. So demand of the consumers is affecting the supply of goods and services from the side of producers. So it is the interaction between the demand and supply for goods and services that will determine their prices and how much quantities of them will be produced. So the first problem, what goods to produce and in what quantities, is answered by or is solved by the interaction of demand for and supply of goods and services. The first problem is solved. So the second problem is how to produce. So we are talking about a free market or a market economy or the price mechanism in free market. So in a free market, the problem of how to produce is also decided through this price mechanism. Okay, so which method we use for production of goods will also depend on the prices of factors of production such as wages for labor, interest on capital, rent of land, price of fuel, etc. So it will depend on the prices of these various factors of production which will decide how to produce. So the prices of these factors are determined by their demand and supply. Again, for example, if capital is relatively cheaper than labor, and then what will the producers do? The producer will use capital intensive method of production. See the connection? So on the other hand, opposite to that, if labor is relatively cheaper, then producers will use labor intensive methods. So they will choose which one is cheaper so that they will minimize their cost of production. So producers will try their best to minimize their cost of production. So they will choose whether labor intensive methods to be adopted or capital intensive to be adopted depending on the prices of factors. So again, it is determined by the various factors of production, that is price mechanism, which will answer to the problem of how to produce again. Third problem is for whom to produce. So the problem of for whom to produce is also solved through price mechanism in a free market economy. How? So the price of the factors such as wages of labor, again interest on capital, rent of land, determine the incomes of the owners of these factors of production. So depending upon the income of various factors or the prices paid for factors of production, depending upon the level of income, then this output is also distributed. So it is these different incomes of person which will determine the distribution of goods for consumption among the various consumers. So we have solved all the basic central economic problems through price mechanism or market mechanism, that is free working of the forces of demand and supply in the entire market or in the economy. So the problems of central economic problem are solved through the price mechanism, and I have explained how that is solved. But we have to keep in mind that there is no country in the world, in the present world today, which allows the solution of these central problems or solving the central problems fully by market mechanism. There's no country in the world today which is allowing only the market forces to work to solve these central economic problems. So even the capitalist countries such as England, USA, France, government intervene in the economy and they have to regulate from time to time in working hand in hand with the market mechanism. Government will intervene directly or indirectly to regulate the market economy. Government will regulate the market through monetary policy or fiscal policy. And again, monetary policy, we refer to the policies regarding the supply of money, bank credit, rate of interest, that is fixed by the Reserve Bank of India. It is the RBI which is taking care of the monetary policy. And fiscal policy is all about the government expenditure and the taxation policies and etc. So direct controls refer to industrial licensing policies, controls on prices, imports and exports. Monetary and fiscal policies can come under indirect control. Direct control is the industrial licensing policies, controls on prices, imports, exports, tax, etc. Government interfere in the working of the market through these various policy instruments. Why government regulate through these instruments? Because they have realized that free working of the market mechanism results in large economic fluctuation, price instability, and unemployment, and lack of economic growth. Because of such problems faced by the world economy, now it is the government who also intervene in the functioning of the market system. We have experienced the Great Depression that happened in capitalist countries in 1929 and 1933. So that incident made the people realize that living freely to the market forces is not possible, and government has to regulate from time to time. And proper monetary and fiscal policies has to be framed by the government to avoid such problems like inflation, price instability, all those problems. Therefore, these days economists lay stress on the interference by the government to tackle the problems of recession, inflation, and also to ensure steady rate of economic growth. So therefore, economists such as Paul Samuelson, Hansen, Galbraith, they call this so-called capitalist economists as mixed capitalist enterprises systems, or simply mixed economics. India is following mixed economic system. This is because in these countries nowadays market mechanism does not work freely to solve these central problems. Instead, it is the government that is playing the active role through the adoption of appropriate economic policies. So we have discussed about the first method to solve these central economic problems. So second method, we have central economic problems and centralized planning. So in this second method, the solving of these central economic problems is done through centralized planning. So let us see how it is done. So in this centralized planning method, the solution of the various central problems is not achieved through the free working of the demand for and supply of goods and factors. So to solve these problems, government set up Central Planning Authority, which is called Planning Commission. So economic problems are solved through Central Planning Authority set up by the government, which is called the Planning Commission. So they will decide how the problems are to be solved. What goods should be produced and in what quantities, and how they should be produced, and how they should be distributed among the population, and how much should be invested to bring about economic growth in the future years, is all decided by this central planning body or the Planning Commission. So this method of solving the basic problems through the use of economic planning have been adopted in countries in socialist countries such as China, Russia, Poland, etc. So in such an economic system, property is owned by the society. Property is owned by the society and not by individual or private company. So, and work of production is organized by the government. So production again is done by government, not the private companies who undertakes the production process, but it is the government. So in this system, private entrepreneurs do not have the right to undertake the work of production, and consumers generally lose their freedom to choose goods for their consumption. Such type of economy, private entrepreneurs cannot take production process, and they have no freedom to produce goods and services. And then even the consumers, they lose their freedom to choose what goods to be consumed in this centralized planning authority or planning commission. But it is through the planning authority, planning board, that these problems of central economic problems are solved. So we have explained that even the market or price mechanism cannot fully solve the cannot alone solve the problems, cannot alone solve the various central economic problems, and even the centralized planning also cannot alone or solve the problem of central economic problems. So we shall see in this topic the collapse of Soviet type socialism. So centralized planning is followed by socialist countries, as I have mentioned. And then we have seen in history that socialist countries or the Soviet type socialism collapse. We shall see why they collapse. So socialist countries such as Russia, Soviet Russia, we can say, East European countries, which were adopting this centralized planning, to solve these central economic problems, they face severe economic problem. So, this severe economic problem obviously led to the collapse of this Soviet type socialism which is based on centralized economic planning. So, what are the important reasons? What are the factor that led to the collapse of this Soviet type socialism? One important thing is lack of efficiency of allocation of resources. This is the main reason. So it was found that for central planning authority consisting of bureaucrats, they were very difficult to make the right decisions for the allocation of resources according to the wants or preference of the people. It is very difficult to make decision by the bureaucrats according to the preference of the people. And then as a result, there is shortage. Some goods are in shortage, some goods are in surplus. So this could not be easily corrected due to because of this efficiency, lack of efficiency. Some goods are in surplus, some goods are in shortage. So again, another problem is that this problem cannot be corrected because of the corruption, because of the inefficient government officials, and then unresponsive government officials. This problem cannot be corrected in a right manner. So this causes a lot of wastage of the resources. So the most glaring example that we can give is the inefficiency in allocation of resources in Soviet Russia and other East European countries, which face during that time acute scarcity of essential consumer goods. They were facing scarcity even in the essential consumer goods. So this ultimately led to long queues of the people at the consumer stores to get these goods. So we shall see what is the next causes, next factor which led to the collapse. So another important reason for the failure of centralized planning was the managers of public enterprises. There were lack of incentives to improve productivity. No incentives of the managers to improve the productivity level and efficiency. So this was due to the absence of profit motive. Profit motive of the manager was not there. This caused not only inefficiency in the use of allocation of resources, but also slow down in the economic growth. So even this centralized planning is not efficient to solve this central economic problem. So the solution is following the mixed type of economy, like India. India is following mixed economy. So in this mixed economy, both the private sector and economic planning by the government plays an important role in the working of the economy. And in India, it is both the private and the centralized government commission or the central authority and central planning authority which work for the which is playing an important role in the Indian economy.